Hi, good to be here. Glad to see you here all this, I could say, early Saturday morning. A few familiar faces always helps. My name is Andrius. I guess the first thing to say today would be just to define what's my relationship with games. So my day-to-day work, which is business strategist, doesn't have a lot to do with gaming, but I play a lot of games. I play a lot of games, then I feel bad about it. When I feel bad about it, I decide that I need to do something meaningful. When I decide to do something meaningful, I do a presentation like this. This is not the first time speaking about gaming, and usually I have a very simple idea. Gaming industry is such a huge thing. It's doing lots of cool things, but nobody's learning from it. So today I'm going to do exactly that, just show different ways in which everyone can take something from what games and the game industry in general is doing. Because there are a few bits. Games are some of the most complicated products. In a sense, you need diverse teams, you need a lot of people, you need different skill sets combined to make a single thing that a person can play. If you continue that journey, it also needs a lot of interdisciplinary development approach. So it means you're combining artists, you're combining music makers, you're combining developers, programmers into a single combination. You have to make those teams work, you have to somehow manage them, you have to make them to deliver the final product, which is not an easy task. And if you take any product, any development product, any IT product on Earth, it wouldn't be as complicated as gaming are. And gaming industry is one of the most dynamic markets. You have lots of products, lots of new things coming out every single day out there across the world. And it's really difficult to understand how it works, what is happening at the moment, and how it's changing. And if we continue these games, we can say that even the franchises are some of the most interesting ones. Gaming brands in general make some of the most interesting branding lessons. And the last thing is communities, which people that play, people that write comments, people that go online and talk about gaming. This is not an easy crowd to deal with. These are not just happy people who like your game. Usually these have to be managed, these have to be moderated, and those have to be dealt with. So if we're saying that all these things combined, if we take everything that's really complicated about the gaming industry in general, if we take games as a complicated matter, and say, okay, so why is it that if games are so cool and the gaming industry is so complex and dynamic, why is it so that nobody is actually learning from it? Because there are no single textbook, no single course online that would take lessons from gaming in business development, in product management, in marketing, branding, or design or user experience, in any of those fields. It so happens that somewhat, even though games are a really interesting phenomena, and it's a huge phenomenon with the world, nobody's really learning from it. So that's exactly what I'm trying to rectify here now. It's one of the biggest industries, we all know that. Esports are going to take over the traditional sports and Olympics pretty soon, and it's one of the most interdisciplinary ultimate medium, because it combines pictures, it combines images, it combines motion, it combines 3D graphics and spatial architecture and sound into a single final experience. So my question here today is, I think that games need to take the rightful place in a cultural pattern, but only that's going to happen once everybody starts learning from it. And it's usually learning by analogy. So it means, what if the gaming industry has discovered something interesting and we just take it and apply it elsewhere? So this is exactly what I'm trying to do today and talk about these lessons. Take the lessons that gaming industry learns, apply them elsewhere, and see what happens. So that's the intro, that's the whole general idea of the talk. To see in what different ways we can learn from the gaming industry and apply those lessons to our everyday work. As I said before, the gaming industry is not something that's really simple. It's getting more and more complicated. If we take this idea, we can have the content complexity, which is the product itself. Games are complicated, and they're getting more and more interesting. And infrastructure is getting more complicated as well. So it's marketing, sales, how games are being presented, how they're being developed, how the customer feedback, the client feedback is taken into account, also getting more and more interesting. And if we discuss this, there's storytelling complexity, there's mechanical complexity, there's graphical complexity, and all of these are evolving. So let's say if you're a fighting game fan, or you just at some point in your life you decide you want to get into fighting games. So you just, okay, what's the starting point? I pick up this game, then I try to learn some of the basic terms. I go online, I look at the Dust Loop special wiki page, and I found I have to learn 150 different terms just to get started in the fighting game and to be something in the fighting game community. So that's only for beginners. You have to learn 150 different terms for just being able to understand what the different YouTube videos are talking about. So that's the starting point. If we take the latest entries in well-known genres and in well-known franchises, take God of War, we can already see that there's actually storytelling complexity. A hack-and-slash game, hack-and-slash series that's been known for its brutality for a very long time somehow is evolving into a kind of a father-son simulator out of the sudden, and everyone is really happy with it. So there are games that are evolving in terms of how they tell their stories and how the narratives unfold in those games. There's also psychological depth to these games. I mean, if you take it to Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice, that explores the theme of schizophrenia in a specific context. You can also see that games, even though at first they're kind of one-layer creations that really don't delve deep into how people think and how they react to environment, start to investigate the problems and investigate themes they have never done before. So everything's getting really much more sophisticated, much more complex, and if you don't kind of keep up with the games, the games keep on moving. So my whole idea is that over time, the gaming industry has evolved its own set of rules, lessons, and findings. It's really interesting to see how those apply to elsewhere. So today, I kind of cherry-picked 4 areas. There's a lot more. I kind of cherry-picked 4 areas we can talk about and discuss that I think are most interesting and could yield results if we just try to understand how those work in games. So the first one is my pet subject, is creating and managing gaming communities. The second one is engagement mechanics, so how games kind of keep you engaged, keep you coming back, and how that can help us in other areas of lives. Then we have user experience design, and the last bit is product development. So let's kick it off with the first one, creating and manage communities. And this is something that I guess applicable to most of the businesses and brands. Everyone wants to have a community. Everyone wants to get value from the community and to manage those communities. But the gaming industry kind of, for a long time, has learned one single principle that kind of makes sense elsewhere. It's make it easy for others to add value. At any point, if you're creating a game, if you're managing a community, if you're doing something with consumers and clients, the single principle you have to apply is just making it really easy, giving the tools to people to create content and to provide something useful. So how it works with gaming in the gaming industry, you have all of these communities. You have streamers, you have content creators, you have Redditors, you have community managers, we have wiki page managers, you have journalists. And the interesting bit that if traditionally we think that journalists are the most important, so for games, journalists kind of fall at the lower end of the spectrum. And all of these people are usually different people. So let's say if you have a streamer is usually not a content creator. So if you want to catch the content creator and a streamer, usually those are 2 different sets of people that you have to address and talk to, and then provide the tools just for them to make content about your game. So what happens is, for all of these people, game developers, usually what they do is they give them tools and reasons to contribute. And there are different ways of doing that. So for a very long time, back in, I guess, 10, 15 years back, with the first System Shocks and Half-Life, there was a concept of emergent gameplay, which meant that you can create a world and create systems of rules that people can interact with differently, and it means that you can solve the same set of problems by using different set of tools. So it means 2 players playing the same section of game can come up with different solutions in that environment, in that level, and can even find sometimes solutions that kind of break the game or break the logic that the developers thought of was the right way to do things. So emergent gameplay was the first step of kind of giving the people the freedom to look for different solutions, and once you get that freedom, it also encourages them to share it. So to share their solutions online and kind of show how they specifically solve that problem. From this, we kind of went to emergent storytelling, which meant that we don't have to tell a single story. We can tell many stories at once, and it doesn't have to be a story that's easy to understand or easy to conceive. It means that if we manage to tell stories that are engaging, that are open-ended, that don't give you all the possible answers in one playthrough, that somehow, instead of people running away from the game, you had more people actually sticking around for way longer, even buying into the novels and extended fan fiction. Or emergent world building, one of the best examples of one of the biggest failures that turned into one of the biggest successes, which was No Man's Sky, which kind of turned the tables around by allowing the players to contribute in the world building game and kind of just point the direction the developers should be working in. And this is where the interesting thing comes from. This is the screenshot that's taken recently. This is what happens when you once you type in Dark Souls lore. Dark Souls is a franchise, it's a series of games that are known for their kind of brutal mechanics and very difficult gameplay. But the thing they did with the series was that they decided to kind of leave the narrative mostly out of it. So it means that you're playing the game and it's really hard to understand what's going on, what's happening with the game. Because all the different bits and pieces of the game's narrative are put into item descriptions like these. This is what you get. And you get thousands of different items with different descriptions, you get statues, and you get an environmental level design. You can play through the game, you can spend 200 hours in it or 300 hours in it and never understand the story of the game, because everything is really hidden away. And if you think about it, it's more like, even though it's an action game, if you try to dig into the storytelling part of it, you start to understand it's more of a detective game. And the result of this is this picture. Just previously, YouTube allowed to show how many different entries you have for one keyword search. And at some point when I was checking, Dark Souls had more lore videos than Star Wars and Lord of the Rings combined. Which meant there are more people making content about Dark Souls story, the environments and the characters and the history of the world that was being created there than people who actually would be interested in Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, which was insane. You had these franchises that are spanning across 15 movies, that have numerous books and fiction written about them, that have games, and they have less of this stuff that the very brutal games had only sold like 10 million or something copies combined. And that's the power of open storytelling. So it means if you want people to contribute, you have to leave something, and you have to leave work for them, you have to keep the narrative open. And there were even these crazy guys with the Bonfire side chat that had 126 episodes of talks about Dark Souls franchise and everything that went from it, that lasted, let's say, approximately 4 hours, sometimes for 2. So if multiplied, it's 2 guys managed to have 126 episodes just talking about basically 3 games and how they influence the market. The same is happening with Destiny. Everybody, most of you know Destiny, I guess. The same is happening with Destiny. Destiny didn't have a proper story. They had their lore bits that you could find online if you unlock the proper cards. What's happening now, everyone's releasing Destiny Grimoire books that collect the lore and the history of the world into a single book. And people are buying physical books just to kind of get into the history that was mostly absent from the game itself. You have the Ishtar's Collective that have thousands of entries. You have crazy people collecting all the little text bits from the game and putting them on in a single page online. Or even an action-oriented game like Warframe have like thousands of people looking for background lore bits just before the new expansion launches. And this is the way of managing the community. Basically, you keep the game open in certain ways, you keep the narrative open, you keep the people guessing, and you provide them more reasons to come back to. So this is how it works. So a game that has its own lore scholars that produce content ranging from videos for books is a great achievement. So basically you have your own academy. If you wanted to make a Dark Souls university, you can actually do that. Doesn't mean that all games have to do this. Some of them are usually just a simple thing as photo mode, giving you a very simple tool just to take a picture of yourself swinging across the buildings and post it online. Doesn't have to be complicated, but even a simple tool as this has become, the staple standard practice in every single game that you have now. So photo mode, the essence of that is also to making people easy to contribute and to express themselves through the game they're playing. Dead Cells has a nice, had a nice history to it. It was a new kind of roguelike platformer that didn't have much of a budget to work with streamers and content creators. What they did is this interesting thing. So basically, they started with streamers with 0-5 concurrent viewers, then build it up to streamers that have 5 to 25 concurrents, and then kind of brought it up a bit to 25 to 100. And what happened afterwards, once they get these, what you call lousy streamers and not popular streamers, all the popular ones started wondering, what is this new game that everyone is playing except for me? So they started requesting to get the game and get access to it. And by just doing this procedural build up to the community, they managed to get the most important streamers in the industry in their own market basically for free. So games know a lot on how to manage communities. Games know a lot how to actually engage people, and it's usually the lessons they have are quite the contrary to the ones we think they should have. It's all about the openness, it's all about the tools, and it's all about the giving possibilities for people to do their own work. So even though we think kind of that the games do all the heavy lifting for us, that games tell us what to do, where to go, what kind of tasks to accomplish, and what's the story behind this, that games give us cutscenes, the reality is quite different. If games want to engage us, the lesson they have learned is that they have to keep it open. They have to keep it open in terms of their communities. They have to keep it open in terms of the tools they provide. They have to be open even in terms of the stories they tell. So let's go on to the next one, engagement mechanics. Games make us come back to the same piece of content over and over again. Well, this is what everybody loves about games, and this is something that most people hate about games as well. In a sense that games have cracked humans. Games know how to work a human into kind of getting back to the same piece of content for a very long time. And the interesting thing is that games know how to work motivational systems, how to people engage over time, to reward them when the reward needs to be done, and put up a challenge when the challenge needs to be put there. And the best example of this is Diablo III. And Diablo III is the best example of motivational system in the sense that they released a game that actually had 20 hours of content, but on average people found thousands of hours. So how do you get the game that you can actually go through the very beginning to the very end in 20 hours, and despite the fact you can do this in 20 hours, you still stick around for an average 800 or 2,000 hours. I mean, for a Diablo 3 player community, 3,000 hour average is an okay thing to do. And if you keep on digging, so you start finding answers, how they actually managed to reinvent the game, put additional mechanics, put additional challenges to keep people getting back, even though they have completed the game with all the characters in all the possible ways. This is something that we see happen in Fortnite. A seasonal mechanic where you pay for a season pass just to earn the additional rewards is a really interesting one. Because the financial incentive and a financial barrier for you to get a seasonal pass is really low one, but what happens once you get the seasonal pass, it's really hard to keep up. If you want to maximize all the possible rewards in a season, you have to really start playing the game and devote much more of your time. This is what's called the sunk cost effect. If I invested enough of my time into something, most probably I'll keep on investing more and more of this time. And if I might ask the question, how does it actually work in real life? In real life, it works in a very similar way. So most probably, if you have traveled and used Airbnb, you've heard of Airbnb superhost status. Have you? Yes, I guess you have. A superhost is a person who's really good at actually talking to you and providing you the best service in their own flat or house that you're renting. But the way superhost status works is a very similar way as a Fortnite seasonal pass works. It means that it's really easy to become one. It's really easy to get the superhost status, but it's extremely difficult to keep it. So it means you have to keep on a very strict requirements on answering to requests and questions and providing a certain level of service to each and single one of the guests that come over into your house. So in the end, it works as a seasonal pass. You buy it, it's simple, it sounds easy, you get additional rewards, but to get everything out from the seasonal pass, somehow you just wake up 2 months later and to realize you're already 120 hours into the game. And that's motivational mechanic, that's the sunk cost effect. And there are lots of these. There are unlockables, there are customization options, there are daily rewards, there are season resets, there are challenges and events. And all of these work in the same way. They're kind of make up for the engagement game. And if you ask us how companies are applying this, they're applying this in the same way for young people who come into a new company, into a new office. They spend 2 months and they somehow want to be recognized. They want to be accepted. They want to see that they're making a change or they're making progress. They want to see that the colleagues somehow start to appreciate what they're doing. So the very same mechanics are being applied to how companies try to engage and keep their employees on the same page and keep them engaged throughout their early career in the company. So gaming lessons already being kind of start to be trickled down to other areas. One of the more interesting ones is user experience design, because that's a really broad topic. It wouldn't be like 2 hours would be enough to cover everything. But gaming industry was one of the first ones to understand that functionality does not lead to perception. And there's 2 different things that usually have to be separated. The best example is this. This is the Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice combat. It's not extremely complicated. It doesn't have lots of different mechanics. But the reason why it became such a successful combat experience was a simple and single reason that at the very early of the game tells you that if you die too many times, the game is going to delete your save file. So it means whatever position you are in the game, at some point it's going to delete the file and you have to start over again. You don't know exactly how many times, you don't know how the mechanic works. Well, there's some black mass over your hand that keeps on spreading to your body, but nobody tells you exactly how it is. And of course it's fake, because the game doesn't delete the files. But what it changes about your combat experience and the way you experience every single encounter in the game is that you start believing that this really important battle you're fighting. You start believing and you start threatening for a single encounter that can go wrong. And just because of the simple message they put out at the beginning of the game, you kind of feel that everything has changed about it. So this one way of showing that sometimes subjective little functional innovation can actually go a very long way. The same way in a Firewatch, which is more of the not text-based, dialogue-based adventure game where you explore the surroundings, you talk to people, and you have to solve some mysteries. What they did, they decided we want to make the conversation much more real, much more engaging, so that kind of people would feel the weight of the conversations. And understood that in the market for a very long time, the conversations didn't feel real for a simple reason, is that you always have to choose an answer, and there's always an answer for you to choose. And usually you don't have time pressure, and you always have something that's ready for you to answer. What they did in this game, they made an option for you to not answer a query. So it means if you're making up your mind for too long a time, the game just understands you're keeping silent and factors the silence into the conversation. So if you're not saying anything, the other person you're talking to is going to react to you not saying anything as the same way as they would in a real world. So let's say if your friend asks you a question and you keep silent, they kind of understand your silence as a sign of something, that they don't want to talk to you, that they want to interact with you, but maybe you don't know the answer, etc., etc. Or maybe you're just a bad person or an asshole that doesn't answer any questions. So also, a very simple innovation, what it changed about the game, that every single conversation in the game became a very weighty option. You start to understand the importance and the weight of every single line of dialogue you're saying, just because if you don't say anything, your silence is also going to be held as an answer. And these tricks also work as a kind of logistics of empowerment, how to make people powerful in a game. And it's usually not about giving them bigger guns, but just changing the mechanics of how the world works. So one of them is the System Shock. What System Shock a very long time ago started doing is that the last bullet you do does double damage. So it means you're running out of bullets, you have a very tense situation, you know that you have 2 or 3, the last ones left, and you still have enemies around you. You start shooting, and the last bullet you will shoot will have a significant impact on the enemy, most probably killing the enemy. So what you feel is always have these situations where you have this hanging by the thread or cliffhanger situation where you didn't have any options, but somehow you managed to get out of it alive. And just because the last bullet, the hidden mechanic in a game was such that the last bullet always did double damage. Or in BioShock, they inverted this and said, and they changed the mechanic into this so that the last damage you actually takes give you invulnerability for 1 to 2 seconds. So you'll always have this almost died experiences that you kind of get away by the thread, that the enemies almost got you, but still you manage to somehow stay dry throughout the situation. So 2 different hidden mechanics just to actually bring you to feeling empowered as a player. So if you take all of these and you combine them together, you have games that somehow make you feel in a certain way and understand what are the best ways of make you empowered or make you invested or make you really interested in the narrative. The other topic is information design. So it means how the games are working with some of the most complex structures of information. Let's say you play a game and you have 200 items in your inventory. How do you manage that? How do you present 200 items? Is it a list? Is it visualized? How do you pick new items? How you discern what you just picked? How do you find that in your inventory space? And all of different other technical, you could say, issues. How to represent information for players so we could make informed decisions in the shortest possible amount of time, which is a problem that anyone actually is solving if they're creating a digital product. So there's already been lots of examples from Destiny 2 and Destiny 1, the way they managed to reimagine how the interface should look like, how the mouse moving is kind of sucked into those areas so you could actually clearly see and get a feeling that you're selecting something and not selecting something by accident, how the different groupings of items work so you never feel lost, you always see what's new in your inventory. And it's a whole different, a whole area for investigation. There was David Candland was making a presentation at a game developers conference and has a 2-hour talk on a single issue of making the Destiny's inventory. So it's really good, it's really a nice watch. And not even information inventory is the biggest issue here. Some of the games have some of the most complicated level designs, and yet they manage to make people understand how to navigate those levels. Some of the best examples are from Bloodborne, PlayStation 4 exclusive. It's a kind of you could say hack and slash horror RPG game that has very complicated vertical structures. So it means if you have, it's even impossible to draw a map of the game because it's so convoluted, it's so complicated in terms of different layers of the map being put on top of each other, and you don't have a map. You don't know where you're going. But just because the designers are so good at making, at highlighting certain areas of the map, creating memorable scenery, that it's really impossible to get lost in it. At least you only have to run through it for a couple of times, then you understand this complicated vertical structure. Or Xenoblade Chronicles also did the same thing. Especially Japanese developers, instead of making horizontal games where everything is flat and you're just running around the dungeon like in Diablo, they really like making vertical alignment games. So it means that all the levels are stacked on top of each other. So in the Western world, we really like everything flat. In East, usually the levels become really complicated in terms of vertical structure. And the same are applied in Dishonored. But none of these games are complicated for us to navigate. None of these games really make us feel lost. Even though usually we don't have a map to follow and we don't understand where we are, all of these games manage to feel us as we understand the space that is around us, that's above us and below us. And this is something that environmental designers and architectural designers should really look into. And the final area is the product development. It's only a bit of the highlight. The gaming industry was one of the first ones to understand that the game we're selling is only a tiny part of the whole package. That everything that happens around games, everything happens outside of the game itself. So basically, if you go through the full story, usually you have the core product that's to the right. It's being extended from DLC packs, Game of the Year editions, and remastered versions. And to the right, just before actually the game launch, you have limited showcases, you have closed and open betas, you have green light and early access. So instead of selling the single game, like you have the core product, what you're doing is you're creating an ecosystem of things that happen before you launch a game, before you have it, and then happens afterwards. So it means you can monetize a lot longer than you usually have. And now everyone's really talking about how the games are becoming much more of a service than a just finite product. Selling the concept is the initial part of the game that everyone's doing, and then moving from product to service is what happens after you launch the game. So it means you'll be trying to keep the people engaged, and the package that comes with the game is usually the community as well. So it means you have to have people who are discussing it, you have to have people who are actually posting content on YouTube, and you have to have people who help you with different tasks or different issues you have with the game. So when you're buying a game, a part of the price that you're paying is not the game itself, is also the active community that is being a part of the game that's all with it. And by active community, I mean all of these things. So basically, instead of just buying the gaming experience, you're buying all other fans who will be playing and sharing their experiences, writing about and investigating, writing analysis, putting content on YouTube. Because now, by modern calculations, if you play a game, let's say it's going to only take up like 30 to 40% of your time. The rest of the time, you'll be talking about the game, you'll be watching YouTube videos, you'll be watching streams, and you'll be looking for answers online. So now, since we have this equation, the paradoxical thing to say is a game, the bigger part of the game, and your experience with the game is spent on not playing the game, but doing everything else about it. And it's really interesting how the market works itself, because in the industry you can see how every year, every 2 years, you have these shifts from, if you have games that are really narrative heavy, how suddenly they became devoid of story and just the gameplay. Or if you have a game that's built on, popular games that are built on simple mechanics, and suddenly in 2 years everybody's really tired with the simple mechanics and you have complex systems at play. Or let's say if it's entry difficulty games, and then you have in 2 years the most popular game is the Impossible Challenge game. And just a really recent example, the Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which recently launched, and it features some of the staples of how Ubisoft make their games, which you have a map, you have lots of markers on the map, you have lots of things to do, everything's put into tables and completion rates. You don't have a single minute to wait to think, what should I do in this world? Because even during the loading screen, or the first thing you would see when it loads would be tips of where to go and what to do. So the player is always led by hand, the player always knows what to do, the player is always shown all the possible collectibles and interesting points. Even though it's an open world, there's really little to discover in it because everything is already given for you, and you can see all this stuff happening. And you can see, okay, so this is working, this is great, this is huge, this is how things work with games now. I dig it, it's nice, but then the second biggest game that launches has the open world concept that's entirely different, where Red Dead Redemption, second Red Dead Redemption games gives you an open world that doesn't have any of these. That doesn't tell you where to go, that has an open world that doesn't care about you. That has different mechanics that are not explained, and you have to discover it all by yourself, which is antithesis to the Ubisoft game. It's an entirely different experience that doesn't have any of the lessons that everybody's learned. So it's interesting how you can never say for sure, this is the thing that works in a gaming industry, because in 2 years, when everything's really happy with one concept, another will come along that completely will change that initial concept and turn it on its head. And it's funny to look how in basically 2 years from Battle Royale game and the 2 games that were leading, that were born from the bots, now instead of just having one mechanic and one type of built on it, now you have the Fantasy Royale, you have Survival Royale, you have Auto Royale, you have Zombie Royale. Most probably this is going to die really soon because everyone's fed up too much with it. So what I'm saying is that the pace of change in gaming is really one of the fastest there is, and you can see how things develop and how things change over time in a very short period. The interesting thing is that for games, really innovation and new ideas really don't come from just people sitting on a desk and coming up with a brilliant idea and then executing it. Because the gaming industry has already found out in a very long time ago that innovation in gaming usually works from figures like these. You have 400 initial ideas that you consider good, but then you select only 20 of them, and then you execute only one of them, which is basically 5% chance of something getting through initially to the consideration stage, and only 5% chance from the consideration stage of something being implemented. And what the gaming industry understood a long time ago, to make something remarkable, something good, you actually have to have those 400 good ideas to start with. Because only you have one, the possibility of that one idea being the idea that really brings you success and all the other possible things, success and business results, is not going to work out. For it to work out, you always have to choose. It's the same way you would actually want to hire a person to work in your team, and you want it to be a really good person, you would have to have something to choose from. If you hire the first person that you meet in the street, it's never going to be the one you want in your team. So the team really understands how to do this innovation funnel, how to move from 400 ideas to one, but also understands how to have those value propositions, like a single statement in product development that makes everyone work on the same page. So let's say have one statement work for company, for the users, for marketing, and for sales. And it's really find it funny how they have these simple statements. Like for when Stellaris was being developed, they had a statement that made the universe is vast and full of wonders, and it was the guiding principle for every single person on the team. So it means it guided the product development. They also stated what the value for the consumer, for the gamer will be. They also used for marketing, and then it's used for sales. And just a simple statement like this. My favorite story for value propositions was Dark Souls. And their story was based on a simple idea that, okay, look, everybody dies in games. Like every single time you play a game, you die, but somehow the games play around a simple concept of some pretending that you didn't die and restarting your progress from some earlier point, just forgetting that your death even occurred in that world. And Dark Souls was actually Demon Souls even before that was one of the first games that used death as a central mechanic in a game. So it means when you die, you lose all that you collected throughout the game in terms of currency, which was souls at that point, and you have to restart from a checkpoint, but it accounts for your death. Your death actually happened, the narrative explains it, the world explains it, it takes it into account, and then they use the central mechanic as the main marketing principle for the full game. So they had this prepare to die term, and they used it in marketing, they used it in all the other efforts to promote the game and push it out to the market, and it was the central thing how everybody recognized the Soul franchise and the Soul series. So it's interesting how they managed to actually build a complex product like this around a single idea and a single concept and move on with it. So since my time is nearing, just to wrap up the things I've been saying here is these are only the 4 areas out of, I guess, 100 or 200 different things that you can take away from games. But basically, if we look at any of those areas, if we look at the creating and managing communities, if we look at engagement mechanics, so user experience design, or product development, any of those areas can give you great ideas of how to apply them to our everyday work, our business lives, our planning skills, whatever you're doing in life. Since I'm a business strategist, I kind of sometimes get even inspiration how to solve certain business issues from any of those areas. And I guess if we want to make gaming a socially acceptable and a truly powerful thing, which it is already now, what we really have to do is we have to have the power to inspire innovation elsewhere. So it means we have to be able to show people that, look, if the games manage to achieve this and to do this in this certain area, we can take those lessons. Those lessons are valuable and can be applied elsewhere. That's my idea. Thanks for listening in and staying for this talk. Now, as I guess, is the question time. If you have anything you want to share with me, you'll find me on Facebook or LinkedIn. So I more than encourage and welcome you to contact me, and let's have a chat. So thanks again.
We have time for a couple of questions. So anybody? Yeah. Your name and question, please.
Hello, my name is Chris, and I'm not actually working in the game industry, but that's sort of the point. I think you mentioned creating communities and engaging communities as the first part. And I think, I'm sorry for touching this question, actually, but that's sort of the point, is that gaming communities can be quite toxic, really. Especially lately, and I think perhaps other industries are sort of afraid of this. So journalists, you can sort of control because they're professionals. Streamers, content creators, they often have some weird ideas and they go on a tangent sometimes. Do you think that's a challenge that can be solved, and how other industries can learn from this, and so that it doesn't become overly frightening?
Yeah. Thanks. That's a really great question. I guess it's as I mentioned even before that the communities are really volatile. So it's really at some point it might be really difficult to control them and to deal with them. But it's not like the gaming industry also couldn't learn anything from other industries. So let's say usually why you have crisis is community management from the gaming side. One of the main reasons is because the gaming industry that doesn't have the basics of crisis management, crisis communication. And if they would have even the basic understanding how do you deal with people when people start insulting each other or threatening or doing nasty things, what's your approach? That it's not silence, that you have to take action, you have to have guidelines, you have to have alignment. Even before that happens, you have to have a plan. That would mostly solve, I guess, 60% of all those cases where things go really south. My point is gaming industry knows a lot about how to engage communities and create them, but doesn't know a lot on how to manage crisis situations. And it's really helped it would be a great help if they just knew the very basics of how do you deal with situations like these, which is their lessons learned elsewhere. I guess what inspires everybody is the success cases. So let's say No Man's Sky is one of the most of the tragic cases in the history of community management, also one of the best ones right now. So I mean, in I say a year and a half, almost 2 years, they managed to do what most of the people would say was impossible to do. How do you take a community that's really huge, that really bought into your game, I was really unhappy with it, and 80% of all of the community members were against the game and kind of pouring hate into the public sphere. How do you take that and turn it into people believing your product once more? So even if you wanted to learn something, you take the No Man's Sky case, and you actually see what they did, in what order, how they talked to the community to actually turn it around. So you only had 20% of people who hated it still, but you kind of brought back the 80% who were disappointed, but now actually back into the game and kind of sharing and even creating content in a positive way. So I still think even the negative cases can actually inspire a lot.